the Electoral College does elect President-elect Joe Biden, are you not going to leave this building?
Just so you, certainly I will. Certainly I will. And you know that. But I think that there will be a lot of things happening between now and the 20th of January. A lot of things.
President Trump speaking to reporters Thanksgiving Day, the first time he's answered questions from the press since losing his re-election bid. We're going to discuss all that and more with the roundtable this morning. ABC News political analyst Matthew Dowd, Washington Post opinion columnist Michelle Norris, Pulitzer Prize-winning author Evan Osnos of The New Yorker, also the author of a new biography on Joe Biden, The Life, the Run, and What Matters Now, and our chief business correspondent, Rebecca Jarvis. Good morning to you all. And Rebecca, I want to start with you. Biden is expected to announce his economic team this week, Janet Yellen for Treasury. Why do you think she was chosen? There were several names that were floated. And what do you think it means?
Well, Martha, she's brilliant, she's experienced, and she has very broad support. The progressives like her, but so do Wall Street and corporate America, and she has bipartisan support. She also has a huge task in front of her. And while President-elect Biden has been calling for more stimulus, an additional stimulus plan, that's something she has also been calling for because of the fact that this recovery that we're in the midst of is still on extremely fragile footing. You have millions of Americans who are still out of work, millions who have slipped into poverty in the last handful of months, and small businesses. Well, you might be looking at the stock market thinking that things have fully recovered. You have the Dow now up at 30,000. That's the biggest 30 companies in this country. Smaller businesses, Martha, they are still in pain, and I hear from them on a daily basis. It is existential at this point as they enter into these winter months. They're worried about their communities, they're worried about keeping their businesses afloat, and they're worried about their customers and their employees.
It is going to be a difficult time indeed. Michelle, Biden says he is focused on bringing diversity to his cabinet, but most of these picks do have something in common. They served in the Obama administration. It seems like the new team is the same as the old team. Admiral McRaven disagrees with that. But do you see any room for fresh thinking?
I think they will see fresh thinking because these are different times. As Admiral McRaven noted, these are all people who know each other, and that is certainly a benefit. It's interesting to look at not just who he's choosing for the cabinet, but how he will compose the cabinet. It's quite possible that given the year of tumult that we faced and all the uncertainties, that he might be expanding the cabinet with new faces, but also with new positions in the cabinet. It would not be at all surprising if he used the envoy position like we see with John Kerry in other situations, likely a pandemic czar, but possibly even someone who would focus on technology and innovation, focus on education, focus on economic problems going forward beyond the traditional rubric of commerce and the Small Business Administration.
And Evan, you wrote the book on Joe Biden, quite literally, in terms of the choices he has made so far in national security especially. He is clearly choosing people in large part who he knows well.
Yeah, these are people who he trusts, but most of all, he trusts their experience. They have been through hard problems. Some of them have been involved with decisions they regret. The involvement in Iraq, of course, the war in 2003, or the decision to go into Libya. But they have some scar tissue, and that's because they know these jobs. They know how to go into an office on day one and make a difference. And I think there's another key piece of this, which is we talk about the extraordinary diversity that we are seeing in some of these choices, diversity of race and also of background. But if you take somebody like Linda Thomas Greenfield, who's coming in as U.S. ambassador to the UN, she's also an extraordinary example of full spectrum of American income experience, background. She is the first person in her family not only to graduate from college, but also from high school. And she served at the highest ranks of the State Department. So there is a real effort to make this government, as Joe Biden says, look like America.
Were you surprised at all that he brought John Kerry into the team?
No, I thought that is a measure of both Kerry's respect for Joe Biden and also Joe Biden's belief that climate change is an essential issue, not just about climate and dealing with this existential risk to the United States, but also about national security. It's about our standing in the world, our standing in the global community. John Kerry knows how to go around the world and get people to talk to him and take him seriously, and that puts climate at the very top of the president-elect's agenda.
And Matt, most of the picks appear headed for smooth Senate confirmation, but how difficult is it going to be for Biden with the remainder of the team, with people who appease the progressive way of thinking in the Democratic Party, but getting them through the Senate?
Well, you know, Martha, for us in the Christian faith, today is the first Sunday of Advent, and it is symbolized by hope. And so my hope is that what you just said is true, is that the Senate, regardless if it's 50-50 or the Republicans have a certain advantage, they'll look at the competency and qualifications of Biden's cabinet. What I think will happen is that the Republicans will approve most of them, if not all of them, with a few exceptions. And I think they're going to do a few exceptions. They'll pick out one or two people in order to show the base of the Republican Party that they can stand up to the new president after January 20th, that they'll pick somebody out and try to defeat one or two. But the majority of these, I think, will go through. Nobody so far is outlandish. I think one thing that I think Joe Biden, if I were him, would do is try to put somebody in a cabinet level position, whether it's a czar, over democracy and the institution of democracy in this country. What we've seen over the course of the last few years, and especially the last month, is an attack on the democratic institutions of our country. It's a lot like water pipes in our country, Martha, where you can't just ignore them for 80 or 90 years and think they're all fine. We have to do repair on the institutions and the infrastructure of democracy. I think that's really important. And I think that's really, really important for Joe Biden to recognize that 74 million people voted against him, and there's questions in a lot of people's minds about the institutions of democracy.
And on that note, Michelle, Biden is set to receive the presidential daily briefing first thing tomorrow. Even if Donald Trump publicly fights on, it seems he is signaling he knows this is over.
He's signaling that, but, you know, you never know from one day to the next whether that message is going to hold. I mean, he's now saying if the Electoral College approves Joe Biden that he will leave. But will he ever really leave? I mean, I think it's safe to assume that he will represent thunder at the fringe for years to come, that he will be a important person in the party, a greatly influential person in the party. But as Joe Biden moves into this position, just reaching back to something Matt said about comity, you know, being able to actually work with the other side. In Joe Biden's Thanksgiving address, you saw his message of healing. You saw him talk about the need to come together and unite to move forward. It might be a lot harder for Republicans to take that hard-line, closed-arm stance when that is juxtaposed to someone who is actually speaking with compassion and empathy and trying very hard to pull the country together so we can pull forward and meet some of the challenges in front of us.
And Matt, back to you. Mitch McConnell still has not said much about Joe Biden at all. What's his strategy here?
Well, I think his big worry, I think everything Mitch McConnell is focused on right now is the 2 Senate races, special elections in Georgia on January 5th. That will determine whether or not he's majority leader or not come that day. And so I think that's what he's focused on. I think he's trying to balance. Mitch McConnell, all of us know, is smart enough to know Joe Biden is going to take the oath of office on January 20th. He knows that. He's trying to figure out how to balance that with this election going on and trying to keep the majority in the Senate. So he's, as always, an operator in the midst of this. He will come along. I think the question is he and Joe Biden have a personal relationship that goes back decades? And can that personal relationship overcome the natural tendency we seem to have today to fight and battle and be polarized? And I think that's, what is really, will be really telling is, can a long-term personal relationship that we thought was of respect, can it move the country in a way that gets things done?
And Rebecca, I want to turn back to COVID. You talked a little bit about the economic strain. There is good news on the horizon. Dr. Fauci, of course, talking about the vaccine next year. But how will that change things? How many businesses go out of business? What will the country look like post-vaccine, do you think?
Well, Martha, what we're seeing now is that while a lot of businesses in the last handful of months started to see things looking up, these last handful of weeks and what we are now heading into, these winter months before there's a vaccine, before it's widely distributed, are very uncertain. And they're especially uncertain if you run a restaurant or a bar or a small retailer. And for these businesses, in particular, the people who work for them, 3.5 million Americans who work in the leisure and hospitality space still don't have their jobs back from February. All of these small businesses, while they may have taken PPP earlier in the year are not. They don't have an additional lifeline at this point, and thousands of them are at risk of potentially closing, even though there is this vaccine on the horizon, Martha, because there's this bridge. And the bridge doesn't exist currently for so many. And that's a big question that Janet Yellen will have to answer in her role as Treasury Secretary. She'll have to draw on her experience as Fed chair, looking at some of these structural issues that exist within the U.S. economy and thinking about how in the future, as we go forward, how to rebuild from where we are right now, because the structural issues are there and they are impacting businesses right now.
And Evan, in Biden's very sobering COVID speech, he urged Americans to persevere, declaring America is not going to lose this war. It's almost like he's preparing to govern essentially as a wartime president.
Yeah, you heard a very prayerful tone from him. This was a man who recognizes the gravity of what we're facing. And I think what you heard him saying also was that out of division, in our finest hours, we can find unity. And it's striking to me that he has spent some of the past week or two talking to local mayors, many of them Republicans. He's saying to the public, look, I get it. If Washington Republicans are not going to acknowledge this victory and help us move on and begin this transition, I'm going to talk to the people on the front lines. And it was, after all, Republicans on the front lines who were the ones who forced Donald Trump to acknowledge the fact that this was over. Donald Trump and Joe Biden may never have that kind of meeting of the minds, but Joe Biden's not waiting. He's talking to people who are dealing with this every day.
And Michelle, you talked a bit about what Joe Biden will face and the issue of democracy. When he takes office next January, he's going to face a monumental challenge of millions and millions of Americans not really believing the election results. Does he have a prayer of bringing those Americans on board?
You know, I don't know that he can bring them on board, but he can govern them effectively whether they get on board or not. And he might just have to figure out how to do that. He's talked so much about unity and healing, and that seems to be his natural octave. He is so effective when he speaks in those tones. But at the same time, the diverse coalition of voters who sent him to office, who elected him, are also looking for him to demonstrate a bit of a warrior spirit, which means not just extending an olive branch, but also trying to show that he's willing to push for reform, that he's willing to push back and tussle with the Senate if they are not willing to work for him. It's going to be very difficult for him to do this, but it's possible that he might, and we saw a break perhaps in the Republican allegiance in the days after the election, because as Evan noted, there was a break. You know, Republicans in Arizona and Michigan and Georgia, you know, they broke from the party line and upheld democracy. They made a choice and they put America first. And you might, you know, hopefully see that happening more often as he takes that oath of office.
And Matt, it seems clear no matter what happens, Donald Trump is probably going to remain a force in the Republican Party. What does that mean for any new Republican leaders or hopefuls?
Well, I think that's the biggest pressure. And yes, there's going to be pressure on Joe Biden to see what he can do. And I think one of the moments that people underestimate is when he puts his hand on the Bible on January 20th and swears his oath into office. There is a shift among the country, maybe not for all of Donald Trump's supporters, but for a significant portion. They're going to actually open their eyes and listen to some of what Joe Biden has to say. But the Republicans are going to be really struggling with this, because if they want any new generation of leaders or any new leaders to emerge that isn't Donald Trump, that sort of represents the Republican Party in a different way, maybe back to a more principled conservative way, how it used to be, they're going to be blocked by Donald Trump. And I see no incentive for Donald Trump to go away in this. He's got a huge amount of followers. He's got the second most votes that ever been cast for a person in history in the country, upwards of 74 million people. People love him. The Republicans that follow him love him. He's got 95% support among Republicans, another high standard for a Republican in this. He loves to be in the limelight, Martha. He loves to be on stage, even though now he's not the main actor in the play that we're seeing unfolding come January 20th.
Okay, Matthew, I got to stop you there. I got to stop you there, but thanks so much to all of you.